Welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I am here with horror novelist and podcaster and horror fan extraordinaire, Summer Canon. So welcome to the show. So glad you're here. And I just wanted
Thank
to
you
kind of
so
start
much
off.
for having me.
What's that? Oh, yeah. No problem. And I wanted to start off today and say I kind of did a little bit of a deep dive last night and this morning, and I was just so happy that I came across the video of you on your YouTube channel talking about just everything that you've gone through in the last couple of years, with COVID, and talking about maybe taking a break from the podcast and stepping back. And I'm not saying happy like for you for having gone through that, but kind of like happy that I can totally relate to that on a human level and going like, finally somebody is like admitting like last couple of years have sucked and it's going to affect our lives, and it's just a lot. And not just on the creative level, but just as people, as parents, as people who have to go on social media and talk about themselves. So if you're cool with talking about that for a little minute or so, I'd love to hear about that.
No problem. We can talk away about it. Because I hang around with creatives a lot, big surprise, creatives are a complainy people. So my circle isn't a bunch of people who are trying to gloss over what we've been going through the past 3 years. But I know that it is something that's happening. Everybody's trying to move on, trying to forget. And that's how some people cope. It's not how I cope. And I definitely, as someone who's expected to put myself out there, I am as much a product as the works that I create. And I went through a period where I just kind of wanted to bug out. I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want my face out there. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I wanted to kind of just sit with the bad feelings for a little bit and get through them. So my podcast, A Case for Classics, it's the one that I do by myself. And it's a very niche podcast. I went into that knowing it was going to be niche. I expected to maybe have 10 listeners. And I've got a few more than that. Still not many, but a few more than that. And it's a very time-consuming podcast to put together. The episodes top out at about 20 minutes, but there's a lot of prep work that has to go into it. I have to read the books I'm recommending. I have to read up on the authors of the books that I'm recommending. It's very time-consuming. But the podcast itself is very, it's kind of low rent. It doesn't have the best editing. It's just me in this very room right here. I live really close to a regional airport. So, and it'll probably happen here. There are constantly airplanes going over my house, and you can hear them in the podcast. And I've had people tell me I can't listen to it. I can hear airplanes in the background. And it's kind of like, well, that kind of hurts my feelings a little bit, but I understand.
What can you do, right?
Right. But it turned into a thing where I started to feel like this is a huge drain on my time for very little reward. And I announced on the podcast that I was done. I was going to kill it. And I was upset. I was very sad because the truth of the matter is I'm doing this for myself. I've read some amazing works of classical literature, not just by dead old white men. I've read some works by very diverse voices that I think were important to me, not as a creator, but as a human being to read. And it ended up meaning a lot to me. So I was very sad when I said I was, this is the goodbye episode, we're done. And people reached out to me, people who had never talked to me before, and said, please don't get rid of the podcast. Please don't delete the episodes you've already done. This is very entertaining to me, very interesting to me. Please don't. So the next plan was to just upload them all to YouTube, or at least there it's free because you have to pay for your podcast server space. So I was like, I'll just put them up on YouTube, only to find out because in every episode I'm talking about a certain book, I'll read a sample so you can get a taste. Because sometimes, like when we're talking about Elizabethan literature or anything from old timey England, it can get kind of dicey language wise. So I'll read a sample so you can say, no, no, thank you. Or, man, that sounds like something I might like to read. YouTube gets real picky about copyrighted stuff. And for the most part, I haven't gotten in trouble because most of the stuff that I talk about is older and it's gone into the public domain. So there's no problem there. But some of the stuff I've done recently, I did a short stint on talking about Pulitzer Prize winning works. And some of those are modern enough, they're not in the public domain yet. So YouTube probably wouldn't allow me to do a reading excerpt of those. And what eventually ended up happening was enough people talked to me and enough people encouraged me. And I kind of had to eat a little bit of crow and admit I had a bug out moment. And we're just going to keep it. I'm trying to establish a new routine because for 2 years, my kids were homeschooling and there was no such thing as a routine.
Right.
And I'm trying to establish a new one where I can get the YouTube stuff done. I can do my duties for the Ghostwriters podcast and I can do my writing and doing all of that and making time for this very labor intensive literature podcast. It's a little tricky, but I will be coming back.
Okay, cool. As a writer myself, I have to say that what you're talking about at the tail end of it there with the schedule stuff, I find that there's not much you can do if you're determined to get certain things done or if you have deadlines. There's nothing you can do. Everything just kind of bleeds together and overlaps. And it's just, unfortunately, I think in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of, well, then you're just going to get less sleep.
Yeah.
In general, so I am kind of curious to kind of dovetail off of that and ask whether it's from the podcast or just conversations in general, how you might talk to or bring up the idea of like a classic work of literature, whether it's a collection of poetry or a novel or a novella or something like short story collection, to someone who might either be adverse or it's like maybe they're a younger person, because there's a lot of pushback, especially from younger people of like, oh, old dead people. How long is this book? 400 or 500 pages? And everything is just so TikTok and short attention span. So I'm kind of curious, what your method is for that.
I'm not very successful at it, to be perfectly honest with you, but it is an uphill battle. I have my own little thing where I love Jane Austen. And there are a lot of people who the second they hear Jane Austen, they click out.
They just gloss over like.
Yeah. And the thing that's tricky is there has to already be an underlying interest. There has to be an underlying interest in the very least in historical context. When we're talking about certain works of classical literature that were influential on later works of classical literature, which in turn were influential on current works that are important to us, and especially ones that maybe were bled into film, that were able to influence movies and stuff. So like when I talked about Joseph Conrad's The Heart of Darkness, I could then talk about Apocalypse Now,
right?
Because but if you're not interested in that, because it is a tedious, ponderous book, because it's not about action, it's about the journey.
Right.
And if you're not interested in that, if you don't want to have the time to sit down, that's going to be hard. But I can sweeten the pot by saying Joseph Conrad was hugely influential to Hunter S. Thompson and Ernest Hemingway. These men were obsessed with this book. So maybe that'll make you want to look at it too. It's all about placing it so that it sounds interesting by attaching bigger names to it who also loved it. That helps.
Right. One thing that, and this is kind of crazy, but with pop culture kind of reclaiming, I guess, classic literature for its own devices, you're talking about public domain. So things like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, where a young person wouldn't think twice to look at, a display maybe of Jane Austen books or something at a bookstore or a library. But something like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, a young person into horror might say like, "Ooh, zombies," and they just go right to it. And then that kind of triggers something maybe in their mind, like, "Oh, this is based on something else." Like, oh, and then it's like, "Oh, well, over here we also have this, collection of works by her." And they might have not have like I said, never walked by that section of her work, and then maybe that's a thing that just leads them into either picking up the book and buying it at the bookstore, or going to the library and checking it out, going like, well, I want to know where this came from. This didn't come from nowhere.
I think it's good in getting people familiar with the titles of the books. Like I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's an appropriation of any kind, but I do think your average horror fan is not going to stop. And because they're not going to pick up Pride and Prejudice or any sort of Jane Austen novel. And I think part of that is the fault of marketing. Because if you look at a Jane Austen novel, you see those very pale, pink-cheeked women in their Regency era dresses, looking lost in a field. It's all very fraught looking. And what you may not understand, and if you don't have someone to explain it to you, Jane Austen was hilarious. And if you don't know to look for that, if you read her works seriously, thinking that this is like homework, you have to read it like homework, you're not going to see how she's making fun of everybody, the things that she's poking fun at, the culture that she's criticizing in her own way. And if you loved Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, you're not going to like Pride and Prejudice because they're two very different creatures. But I'm not mad at the fact that people will know at least the name Pride and Prejudice because of that. And also movies. People are obsessed with the movies, like the one with Keira Knightley. That's Pride and Prejudice. I keep getting
That one and Emma. Sometimes I just get those confused because they remake those so many times.
They do.
So I guess take me back in your Wayback Machine of choice. And do you remember when, was there a time when you were younger that you kind of started writing your own stories? You were reading, obviously, and then, maybe you started writing your own stories. And maybe there was like a teacher or someone involved that said like, "Hey, you know what? Summer, you have a knack for this."
Gosh, I remember I read my first adult novel. I didn't do, a lot of people my age have memories of reading Goosebumps and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I've never read those books. And because I was a kid who, I had a grandmother who was an avid reader, and she was also a little bit of a hoarder. So her house was this kind of snaking, turning path through her house, just lined with stacks of books up to the ceiling. And if you were a claustrophobic person, you would go there and be terrified of the place. I'm not claustrophobic, so I would go there and be like, "Wee, books!" So I remember in third grade reading some of these adult books, and I was very much too young for some of the themes, but I kept going. For some odd reason, I wanted to read these books because I grew up around women who, that's all they did. Every quiet second they had, they were reading. And that was a way to quiet certain things in my mind. And I just wanted to sit and read. And it was around that same time that my teachers in school were assigning us to write themes. And I found that I loved the research. I love being able to sit down and write a theme. And I always got good grades. I never got special call outs until I was in high school, but I always got, A's, and it always thrilled me. Something I wrote got an A. Yes. And when I got to high school, I entered a writing contest that all the schools in our county were involved in this writing contest, and I won. And I got a special certificate for it. And that was the first time where I was like, okay, maybe this can be more than fun. And I went to college, and I went to journalism school in college because in my mind, that was the only way. In 2001 was when I went to college. That was the only way I could ever really make money writing. And I was in journalism school for 3 years. I did all the classes. And as I started getting higher up and they start becoming more intense with the writing aspect, you would have to go out and interview people. You would have to go into shops and be, excuse me, I'm writing a story for blah, blah, blah. And I encountered a very, very rude person who at first thought I was an actual journalist writing a story for the local newspaper. And when they realized I was simply a student, went off on me. And I responded in kind and got kicked out of their store.
Oh my God.
I reflected this in my paper. And the professor who I had at the time, I was also a work study at the School of Journalism. So I knew all the professors. I'd done work for them. I'd done printouts of all their class planning stuff. And she pulled me aside and she was like, I need you to understand something. You don't like this. You hate doing this. She was like, you're a great writer. There's nothing wrong with your writing, but you hate talking to these people. And I was like, do you think I should rethink it? And she was like, yeah, it's not too late at this point, but yeah. So that part of my life ended. I still have kind of complicated feelings about it because I do still have a lot of love for research and writing about things simply like we were taught to in journalism school. But yeah, I can't deal with rude people just being awful to me. I don't respond well to that.
Yeah, it's really tough to just walk up to people that you don't know and try to get information out of them. That's always a pain in the ass. But I have a two-parter that I thought could be kind of interesting. So do you remember or recall the process of writing your first book and how that started from either, pen on the page or typing on a laptop? What the process was and the time that it took from, first putting down the idea until it was actually on the shelf somewhere.
So my first book is titled Vicky Beautiful, and it's a novella. It's actually very short. It's in the 30,000 word range. It's not very long, but I had a dream. That was what started. I had this really messed up dream, and I woke up and I was like, God, that was messed up. That would make a great book. And I'd been a blogger for years and years and years. So the habit of sitting down every day and doing a little bit of writing was already established. It was something that was no problem. And I just started replacing blog time with book time. And it's a very different creature from writing your daily blog that ranges anywhere from 1,200 to 2,500 words to writing a book that's 30,000 words. And it has to be this continual narrative that it has good pacing, it doesn't sag in the middle, and it has an ending that sticks it. That kind of stuff technically is difficult and requires thought, much more so than a short blog post would. And it took me, honestly, about 2 months to do all the writing. And I started off with what I thought was the correct way to do this, which it turns out in the horror genre, it's always a different game. The horror genre being the redheaded stepchild of the literary world. But I got the book, what's it called? The Publisher's Marketplace book, the one you have to pay $50 for.
Oh, God,
and it gives you the names and addresses of all the agents and publishers. And I queried a whole bunch of agents and not a single reply, not a single reply. And I had been subscribing for a while to Fangoria magazine. And I saw an ad for a publisher in Fangoria magazine. And I went to their website and it said, send queries here. I was like, all right. So I looked up online how to do a professional query letter. And I sent the query and the editor got back to me and was like, we'd love to see it. I sent it in and maybe 3 weeks later, yeah, we'll take it.
Wow, that's a quick turnaround.
It was. The problem being that things started moving very fast with this publisher. So they sent me the contract for this first book. And I ended up in the span of maybe another 2 months signing 2 more book contracts.
Oh, crap.
And
Same publisher though, right?
same publisher.
Okay.
And the day that they released my first book, they announced they were closing. So I had my first book had a home for, I don't even remember, it's been a few years by now, only a few weeks before they pulled everything. And those 2 contracts were essentially dead in the water, which was, it was heartbreaking, but it was a good lesson to learn because the horror genre thrives in the small press and the indie market, a lot of self-publishing going on. It was a good lesson to learn early on because you learn to be more critical of who you choose to work with. But I was eventually able to find a new home for the book and the other 2 books and a couple other books. So we're doing fine.
Awesome. Awesome. So I also wanted to ask, because I watched another great video about you giving the tour of your bookcases around your place,
Yeah.
which is like, wow, she's got some great books. But the one that caught my eye, because I'm also a huge Stephen King fan, was The Stand, because I myself have never read the original version that came out in the 70s. I've only read the complete and uncut brick version of it. And I love that book, but it kind of made me wonder too, because you're talking about contracts with publishers, and that's one of the most famous, revised novels that's been, published twice. So with your own work, I think also you were talking about in the other video that we talked about, doing some self-publishing. I believe the original rights would revert back to the author after a certain amount of time, right? With your previous books. So has that been something that you thought about with older books, or are you just like, oh my God, that was X amount of years ago, that's over, it's a dead fish, I don't want to pick it up again? And also kind of like what in general, what you think about authors kind of revising and republishing work.
I think it's a smart idea to kind of update and shine them up a little bit, especially the older ones. I think it's smart. And those of us who work in the smaller realm, who are in the indie scene, we can't afford to let some of our titles die. It's not kind of in the cards for us, especially if we're hoping to turn a profit in this. So when the rights revert to us, we either have there are publishers out there who will take your older works and kind of set them up in their enormous catalog. That's no problem. Those are usually very well organized publishers. They take really good care of you. Or you can put it out yourself and not split the royalties with anybody. And that's becoming more and more viable with the tools available to us now. But for us indie writers, we can't afford to let a title just go away.
That's true. That's true. And another example with Stephen King is I kind of rolled my eyes just going like just the sheer undertaking of it, of him rewriting the Dark Tower series, because he kind of felt like he kind of rushed the last few after his accident where he was hit by that van, and he wanted to just put the last 3 out really quick, to the point where he went back and rewrote the first one, and I went, and then he published one that's like in the middle of the series too, and I was like, my God, man. Like there's already 7, I guess 8 books now, and it's like, if you're gonna rewrite every fucking book in that series, you know what I mean? It's like,
I do.
but the thing, it never ends too. It's like you can make the case, with George Lucas too, with Star Wars, which is like, when he re-released the original movies with the new effects and new fake scenes, new whatever, and it was like, there was like 50% of great and 50% of just bullshit, and then there was the thing as a fan going like, well, any excuse to go see those movies in a theater. And then as I'm older, I look back and I'm like, oh, it's a marketing thing. Basically, it's business genius, like we were saying, keeping the titles out there and making them new again. And also, this is how I fund my new movies when I'm a one-man studio. And then, a few years later, like, yeah, well, now that I've done that, I'm gonna cash out with Disney. So so yeah, there's so many ways that that all ties together too. And but I'm gonna change gears here because I don't want to forget this because we only have so long to talk. You got to talk to me about werewolves because I love werewolves. I saw, the video that you posted about werewolves. So, what would you say is your favorite werewolf themed book and movie? You can do both if you want.
Werewolves. They've always been my favorite to the werewolf story. It gets more personal, like with the loss of control and all of that. But werewolf movies can tend to get really silly, even when they're trying to be serious. You can end up laughing at a werewolf movie because they put in a really weird effect with the transformation scene and all of that. But I think I have to say, when all is said and done, when the cards are down, my favorite werewolf movie is Silver Bullet. I think, Carlo Rambaldi he did the effects for E.T. and he did the effects for that werewolf. And you hear a lot, it looks more like a bear because the head is very big. It's a big
Right.
wide head. But I think the way that it moves, it looks like an animal. I think it's fantastic. I think the sounds that it makes, it's my favorite. There's a scene in that movie where Marty, our young boy in the wheelchair, he's on a bridge setting off fireworks, and the werewolf is stalking him and watching him. And there's a scene where the werewolf's hand comes out and pulls down a branch to look, and then they do a shot out of the werewolf's face looking out. And because I have anxieties about being stalked and watched, and that shot of that werewolf peeking at him scares the crap out of me every time. So it hits the right buttons. Book wise, I love and hate so many werewolf books. It's hard to be meh about a werewolf book. Either I love it or I hate it. And I really need to look this up again. The problem is it's on my Kindle, so it's hard to flip through a Kindle.
Right.
But I once read a werewolf short story. I don't even remember who wrote it. I really need to fix this because I want to shout this person out because I think about this story all the time. It's funny and it's lighthearted and it's so ridiculous, but it's a story about a guy who catches lycanthropy as an STD from a sex worker. And it's so senselessly aggressive and naggy and picky. It's hilarious. I love reading them, even when I get mad at them because they don't work out. Like Gary Brandner, he wrote the Howling trilogy. Those are the werewolf books for the most part. And I will probably have to reread them at some point because it's weird that I don't like those books, but I don't like those books.
Right. Hey, to each their own. I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring and I'm gonna say that the best still werewolf transformation scene has got to be American Werewolf in London. It's just like, oh God, those practical effects, they still hold up. The movie has like humor and charm and God, the conceit of the guy's best friend coming back as a zombie who's just fallen apart, and
Yeah.
And the sequel was just nothing like that, and I was so disappointed in the sequel because it was just CGI stuff. And CGI is great. It takes you to like other worlds, other planets. That's great, but if it's like up close CGI and it looks like a cartoon, it's bad.
Yeah.
A lot of great werewolf books out there. We were talking about, Silver Bullet Cycle, the werewolf, that kind of stuff. I can't remember the name of the author. It's a short story. And I just remember the inner monologue of the guy talking about how he doesn't know. I love it because it's like he doesn't know what he does. He kind of blacks out, and like right before, and he's always trying to get to a place where he can kind of secure himself or put furniture on the inside against like a hotel, windows and stuff, so he can't get out and hurt anybody. But he always says the transformation is like a cross between. It's so funny you're talking about the sex worker, but he said it's like a cross between having your skin ripped off and having like a 10-minute orgasm at the same time, where it's just like so overpowering that you can't, it's just like it's like a pleasure pain thing to the point where it's too much for your body to handle and you pass out. Like you know this thing is about to happen. It's instantaneous. You can't control it. It's like a feeling of like being reborn, and the next day you just wake up in a puddle somewhere naked, and you're like, oh fuck, not again. Oh God, is that a half-eaten sheep over there? Oh, that's gonna be some explaining to do.
I do want to throw out two books
Okay.
that I love. Blood and Rain by Glenn Rolfe
Hmm.
is perfect. It is such a good werewolf book, and it's a werewolf book that's very obviously written by a werewolf fan. I can't imagine any true werewolf fan reading this and not liking every second of it. And also Wolfland by Jonathan Jans. I joked when I first read this that it's the eyeball destroying book, just because there are so many. It's very fulchy, and that there's so many eyeballs just plucked out, poked out, exploded in this book.
Oh,
But it's a good wolfy book too.
right. That's one of my like least favorite things in a horror movie. I guess everybody's got their thing that they just can't, they squirm through. And for me, it's eyeball torture. It's just like, come on, man, just rip the guy's face off. You have to be like, that kind of thing. But so I guess let us know. Well, first of all, if you have a copy of your latest book, if you have, hold that up for the folks so they can kind of see that. God, look at that cover. Who did the artwork for that?
Chris Enterline did the artwork for this. And it's great when you work with a cover artist who talks to you and wants to get your temperature on some things. And Chris Enterline and Lynn Hansen are two cover artists that they really want you involved in it, even when you're like me and you're like, you're the visual person, I'm not, I do
You're
words.
like, I don't know. I gave you the thing with the stick figures. What more do you want?
But they're very much like, no. Tell me your ideas. Tell me how you want this to look. And the concept of the rag doll, because his first mock-up of it was like a porcelain doll.
Mhm.
And I said, what if we tried a rag doll? And he was like, no problem. And he did this fantastic kind of Raggedy Ann
I
burlap
love the different
doll.
buttons. That's great.
Yep. And
The
he
detail.
did such a beautiful job with this cover. I love working with cover artists because the visual medium is so not my thing. So they always blow me away when they come back with something that's just as incredible as this.
That's awesome. And that's available through Amazon, right? That's where
It's
folks can
available
order it.
through Amazon. If you want to buy signed copies directly from me, you can go to summercanon.com and there's a shop there. I'm happy to do that.
Nice. So I guess let the folks know kind of what you're working on now. You were talking about doing some self-publishing. So as we wrap it up here, kind of just give them, I guess, the lowdown and what you've got looking forward to here in 2023.
There's a lot coming. Look for a short story collection sooner than later, actually. There will maybe be a spooky Western and
Ooh,
at
that's
least one
cool.
collaboration. There's stuff coming. I've got the year planned out.
Nice. I've always said to friends too, I'd really like to see like a horror version of a story really similar to like 310 to Yuma. Like similar characters, but just and I haven't figured that out yet. And this is not like my idea or whatever for people to steal. It's a movie. It's a famous movie. It's been written,
Famous movie.
but it's like something like that. If you could figure out how to put a horror element into it, I mean, gold, chef's kiss. So I guess if you could impart some advice or wisdom on younger people that are kind of starting out now, would you recommend more, knowing what you know now and what you've gone through before, starting with the self-publishing route rather than just browbeating and chasing down publishers?
I'll tell you what's a good strategy right now, especially if you're working within the horror genre. This is the only one I have any experience with. It's the only one I can speak to intelligently, semi-intelligently. Longer works, self-publish, but submit to anthologies. Submit your short stories to anthologies to get your name out there. It's
Right.
much harder to get your work in front of eyes when you're self-published. Become part of the community and get eyes on your work through the short stories.
Very cool. Oh, cool. And then would you also recommend, I know our eyeballs are just so burning every day from all the freaking stuff we have to look at on social media, but would you say that there's maybe three avenues you would recommend? Like, what would you say the top three for you are avenues that you use online to promote yourself or your work?
I mean, full disclosure, I'm not good at it. I try to put
We're all
myself,
failing to find the way.
I try to put myself out there. I try to be the light person online. There's a lot going on, and rightfully so, people want to talk about the heavy stuff, but I want to consistently be a distraction from that. And that's kind of how I've placed myself. I mean, as a creator, for the most part, I'm trying to provide distractions. So my online presence is very inconsequential, very light, very silly, very stupid. And if you like me for that, maybe you'll like the stuff that I write. And that's kind of how I approach it.
That's a good way to look at it. I mean, I myself, I don't know if you looked at too many of the videos, but over the last 6 to 8 months, I've been teaching myself video editing, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to start doing these little skits of me doing just asinine, things under like 3 minutes, just because it's like, as you know, as a podcaster too, that looks and watches other things, it's like if it's just 40 things of just, you might not know all these people that are being interviewed, and it's like, well, I don't know, and oh, he's got this thing that's like a minute and a half, and like oh, look at this jackass. Well, he's funny in a minute and a half. Maybe he's worth watching in a 30 or 40-minute thing. So that's worked for me. Might not work for everybody, but I it was a long road to kind of figure that stuff out. But you kind of seem like you've kind of figured a lot of things out in the last few years. I think we've all kind of gone through the COVID bubble of like, well, I've got this time. If I'm ever going to try something and fail my way to success and figured out this is the time. So, I mean, kudos to you for doing that. And you've, like on your podcast, gotten a lot of things out there about, great works of art and books, and just, congratulations. And I praise you for that. So as we wrap it up here, just let the folks know where they can find your work online.
I can be found pretty much, no, not everywhere. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm not everywhere. I'm too old.
She's not
I don't do
omnipresent
the
yet, folks.
I don't do the TikTok. Like I love the old people thing of putting the in front of words where it doesn't work. So I'm not
Are
on
you
the
on the
TikTok.
Twitter? I was
But
on
you
the
can find,
Facebook and I took a picture of the salad.
that's kind of what I do. You're getting stupid pictures of idiot stuff. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, it's stupid pictures. It's mostly of my cat, but everybody loves my cat, so it works. If you want to find my writing though, I mean, I have an Amazon author page, check that out, but I also have a website, summercanon.com. There's a tab up top that says published works with Amazon links to all of them. If you want signed copies of anything, go to the shop. And you can reach out to me. I'm mostly a nice person.
Nice. Yeah, we will definitely on here. We will definitely put that in the credits and funnel everybody to your site. But I can't believe it. All this time has gone by so fast. I really enjoyed talking to you, and we've had some laughs. And just I want to thank you so much for being on the show. You were wonderful to talk to.
Thank you so much for having me.